It is time for another edition of the Fight HQ podcast. Of course, I am Jason Floyd, be joined momentarily by the fighter Pete Rogers Jr. as we're going to break down UFC Vegas 97, which goes down on Saturday inside the UFC Apex, as we're starting to get rid of these UFC Apex cards as some things are changing for the UFC. So we appreciate everyone tuning in for this episode of the podcast. Of course, as always, I'm joined by the fighter Pete Rogers Jr. Good afternoon, Pete. How's it going, man?
What is going on, my man? I mean, this is a pretty damn good card for being at the Apex, to be honest. I mean, like, there's at least some intriguing matchups, some exciting ones, some solid fighters that we really like and have liked for years now. So yeah, I mean, we've seen the worst of what some Apex cards can be. This is a legitimately solid card, so I'm pretty satisfied.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about the main event, can Gilbert Burns make another run at the title? He's done some interviews leading up to this fight, understands that this is, trying to have that last run to go get a chance in this welterweight division here. And, of course, it sounds like Belal Muhammad is not exactly itching to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. I was seeing some headlines there. He's talking about wanting to fight Usman, so we'll see what happens in terms of that. Of course, if you are watching us on YouTube, we do now offer memberships on our YouTube channel, so be sure to check out that as we do some special content over here. Of course, along with the show, putting some fighter interviews out there. We had an interview with 𝗍𝐸. You can check that out. It was kind of I would say a very fascinating interview, because he talked about, even though you would think, going back to his performance a couple weeks ago, you would go, hey, man, you went out there, yeah, you threw the kitchen sink and, you just fought a tough SOB. But he said that out of a scale of 1 to 100, he only rated himself as a 55 in that performance.
I like it. I like it when fighters are critical of themselves. I mean, I've had some great performances, and I still haven't been satisfied because when you perform so well in the gym, it's very hard to replicate that under the lights. Once you start being able to show your true self under the lights, it's like really satisfying. But that's why when you're unable to get a finish, or you just didn't like how you were technically in some aspects, I do like that from being a perfectionist, if you will, where I try to be as perfect as possible, which is impossible, but that should be the goal of every fighter, is just becoming the perfect fighter.
Yeah, it was it's always kind of interesting when you hear a fighter kind of talk about that, and talk about from the outside looking in, that you could look at it and say, hey man, you went out there, you had an incredible performance, but on the inside they're looking at it and saying, you know what, hey, could have done a little better here, done a little better there. So you can check that interview out on right here on the YouTube channel. Of course, we're going to break down UFC Vegas 97. We do have our DraftKings contest. That contest is already live, so get into that contest, as this is one of those interesting weeks as we talk about game theory here, Pete. The fact of we have a 9,900 fighter this week, that being Isaac Dulgarian a minus 3,000 betting favorite against Brendan Marotta, and going to be kind of interesting if you're trying to build a lineup around Isaac Dulgarian, just kind of how you put that together. And as I was putting my spreadsheet together this morning, Pete, the thing that I thought about, something you've always talked about on this podcast, is prioritizing main event and co-main event underdogs. And you look at the underdogs in the main event, co-main event, I can see very well why you would be intrigued by them. I do wonder with Gilbert Burns, are we kind of we seeing a changing of the guard, and that this is the typical up-and-coming guy in Sean Brady, coming off a win in December last year against Kelvin Gastelum. We know that grappling base that he had. I remember calling his fight against 𝐿Ton Smith, where he just utilized that grappling aspect. And then, of course, you got Jessica Andrade in the co-main event, where she's 7,200 taking on 𝐒𝐿𝐼 Silva. Kind of a similar situation, but it's also like, as I was thinking about that fight, I was like, these are kind of the fights that typically we see Jessica Andrade shine in.
So, yeah, I mean, so it's interesting, right? Like Sean Brady came in, undefeated prospect, incredible wrestling and grappling pedigree, stumbles a little bit, in the third round against Michael Chiesa, stumbles even more against Belal Muhammad. But it's so much easier to now not really hold that loss over his head too much when Belal Muhammad is the champion of the world. So I really do like the fact that Brady came back and it was a winnable matchup against Kelvin Gastelum. He came and he looked great. Gilbert Burns is one of the fan favorite. Like, he's definitely a fan favorite and one of the fighters that I love rooting for. You can, it's crazy what he's done at a higher weight class. When you think back in the day, like Dan Hooker, went out there and knocked him out, and then he's in there throwing it down, like throwing down against 𝐉𝐨 𝐉𝐸 a couple years back, and picking up wins over some good welterweight fighters. So it's like sometimes cutting that excess weight isn't the answer, and just fighting at your natural weight class. Like Durinho looks so much better within this weight class. It's just he's fighting the best of the best. And I do think that like timing is everything in this sport. And Sean Brady is catching Gilbert Burns at the perfect time for a fighter on the rise, facing an old veteran who is somewhat of a gatekeeper now. I think Burns, his jiu-jitsu will always be there and always be live to pull off an upset. And he has incredible power in his hands. It's just about timing. You could definitely talk me into a Gilbert Burns play, and I was really close to pulling the trigger on it. Ultimately, I'm not going to, especially when we get into the breakdown. As far as Jessica Andrade against Natalia Silva, I'm not that interested. I think I'm more interested in Gilbert Burns. I understand it's women's MMA, but I'm very, very impressed with Natalia Silva's elusiveness. I just don't think she will be there to be hit by Jessica Andrade. I think Andrade bouncing back and forth between weight classes over the years, it's good in a way because she's able to gain experience against top-level competition. But I also like consistency. So it's like she's consistently inconsistent. So I really like Natalia Silva in this matchup. Granted, I don't necessarily know if she performs the best as far as a DFS play, but I do think she has all the tools to make this fight look pretty easy against, one of the best women mixed martial artists of all time in Jessica Andrade.
And one of the things that myself and Pete were talking about right before the show was kind of about these 9,000 options, which ones, maybe are not going to go out there and perform the way that you would hope they're going to perform. I think if you look at someone like, Natalia Silva at 9,000, you look at, someone like Murata, Isaac Dulgarian at 9,900, him going out there and being able to shine at that price point, because at 9,900, we need 120, 125 points for that really to pay off that price tag just based on roster construction there. Then I look at Jacqueline at 9,100. Can she pay that price point off against Vanessa? And then, Andre Petrosky he's one of those guys that I've always felt like, for whatever reason, it never works out in my way with him. So we'll see in terms of how that one goes down. Of course, we're going to break down these fights fight by fight. Of course, if you got any questions, be sure to line those up. You can do that in our YouTube chat. You can also do that at the Score channel. Of course, that is Score channel, totally free to join. That link is below here in the show notes. Of course, also got that link over there for our DraftKings contest as well. So be sure you want to get into that one as we do go on here. Well, Pete, let's get right into the main event. It's a big matchup in the welterweight division. You have one guy that's been around, and as you just mentioned a couple minutes ago, has constantly fought the top of this division. Yes, he's 2-3 in his last 5 matchups, but it's been against the best. That being Gilbert Burns, who walks in here as a plus 150 betting underdog. Sean Brady on the other side, he is minus 180. Brady was supposed to fight earlier this year, had to pull out of that matchup. Now in here, on DK, he's 8,700. For Gilbert Burns, he is 7,500. And, one of the notes that I wrote on this one, Pete, was the fact of you got a 7-year age difference between these two guys. And Gilbert Burns, if you listen to his interviews leading up to this one, he's been very clear. He understands that this is his last chance to get back in title contention.
Yeah, so it definitely is his last big step to, challenging for a title again. I said that everything in this game is about timing. Gilbert Burns facing Sean Brady couldn't favor Brady any more than it does right now. You have Burns stumbling in his most recent performance against Jack Della Maddalena after looking pretty dominant in the grappling and wrestling part of the game with 7 takedowns and 5 minutes of control time, and on his way to winning a decision until he gets hit with that knee and followed up via TKO shots from Jack Della Maddalena. Now you have a completely different matchup going up against a very dominant grappler and wrestler in Sean Brady, who's just a physically imposing fighter who is so strong. He has excellent top control. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. His takedown entries, his hips in general, he's very, very talented when it comes to the wrestling portion of the game. I worry about Brady on the feet, if I'm being honest. I worry about Brady getting cracked from Gilbert Burns because Burns' striking has evolved so much over the years. He hits really hard. training under Henry Hoof for years and years now, especially down at 𝐾𝐤𝐬𝐵 FC. He has a room full of talented training partners. His jiu-jitsu is unbelievable. He's just a very dangerous fighter, but we've seen his gas tank be somewhat taxed when he's met with resistance. He's great when he's in the driver's seat. The same can be said with Sean Brady. The one thing is that we have seen Sean Brady fatigue in the past, and oddly enough, Michael Chiesa was kind of giving Brady some problems in round 3, landing a ton of volume strikes on him and, hit him with a throw and got on top momentarily. I will say, though, that, with both fighters showing some signs of fatigue in their fights, Brady is relatively inexperienced when it comes to going the distance as far as like round 4, round 5, especially underneath the UFC lights in the UFC banner. Hasn't done it yet. Gilbert Burns has been 5 rounds. I do think, though, that when we've seen both of them fatigue in the past, I still have to lean towards the younger guy having the better gas tank, being able to recover round to round, being a little bit more athletic when it matters. I think Gilbert Burns will make things very, very interesting. There are some moments in Sean Brady's last performance against Kelvin Gastelum where I didn't necessarily like the positional movements, taking the back of Kelvin Gastelum, getting reversed. Gilbert Burns will reverse and get out of bad spots if you put him there. What happens if Gilbert Burns puts Sean Brady in some compromising positions? The youth and the athleticism, what makes me lean towards Sean Brady. I do think the line is a little wide. I was kind of expecting like 8,400 for Sean Brady, so like a minus 140. As it's approaching up to minus 200, I just think that's getting a little bit too disrespectful, given the unknowns going up against a veteran in Gilbert Burns. You could talk me into a Gilbert Burns underdog play. This could be a vet lesson all day long where Burns just knocks out Sean Brady. Wasn't all that impressed with Brady's striking. I still am not. But I don't, he doesn't need to become a fantastic striker if he can take everybody down. The one fight that he wasn't able to get his opponent down was against Belal Muhammad. And we saw what happened. He was a sitting duck and got outstruck and finished against the guy in Belal Muhammad, who is just a decision type of fighter for the majority of his career. So it's a slight lean towards Sean Brady to win this matchup, and I do think that the takedowns and the control time could boost to a pretty solid score for the 8,700 price tag. I mean, even against Chiesa, he scored 83, having 5 takedowns and 8.5 minutes of control time. Chiesa is a fantastic wrestler. Burns is a very good wrestler as well, but not necessarily defensively. So I think Sean Brady just needs to be wise from some submission attempts from Gilbert Burns, not getting put in a bad spot, in his own right, and just making sure that he's on top of Gilbert Burns. So give me Sean Brady here to win a decision at 8,700, and I like him for DFS just because of the floor.
I would be relatively surprised if we saw Sean Brady make this a stand-up matchup. I mean, the only reason I could see him wanting to make this a stand-up matchup is I think we've seen the UFC has clearly sent the message to fighters that they need to do, you got to be a little more exciting. So we'll see what happens in terms of that. But yeah, I definitely lean Sean Brady in this one. I would expect that we'll see a wrestling base from him in this matchup. And yeah, I think overall, as long as he doesn't get into, a straight up boxing matchup for Gilbert Burns and potentially giving Gilbert Burns a chance, I think Gilbert Burns is going to spend a lot of time on his back in this one. And I think Sean Brady's going to go out there and get a decision victory. Now, our co-main event female matchup, we got 𝐿𝐶ia 𝐳 as a minus 320 betting favorite taking on Jessica Andrade. She is plus 250. 𝐿𝐶ia is 9,000 on DK. Andrade is 7,200. And Pete, I think that this is just simple UFC matchmaking here. 𝐿𝐶ia 𝐳 has been on the rise. Jessica Andrade, by the way, if people have not seen, Jessica Andrade is actually suing her former manager, basically, noting that claiming the manager stole $2 million from her. So that's a kind of interesting lawsuit. People have not seen that one out there, but it's one of these situations where I feel like these are more times than not, these are where Andrade does succeed.
Yeah, see, I see what you're saying. Andrade as an underdog is always appealing, right? Like, she's able to go out there and, get a victory over Mackenzie Dern. She like, in certain matchups, she can impose her will, especially if she can integrate some takedowns. She's really sloppy despite having 38 professional fights. She keeps her hands by her chest. She swings from her hips at times. She's very wide with everything. So somebody who's very precise that can step back and counter like a 𝐷𝐷𝐼𝐿𝐼 Silva, I think can eat her up. I really do. I think like Yan Xiaonan being able to step back and crack and knock out Jessica Andrade is huge because I think 𝗵𝐷𝐼𝐿𝐼 Silva is even better than Yan Xiaonan. So I am not a fan of Andrade from an underdog standpoint this week. I can see why some people would just blindly get to it because of women's MMA underdogs cashing and coming through more often than not. I'm not in that department this week. So I think that 𝗵𝐷𝐼𝐿𝐼 Silva priced at 9,000 is probably on paper one of the ugliest picks just because of what she's done in the past. 51 against 𝐅𝐢𝐠𝐻, 58 against Lee, 85 against 𝐵LEDA, 85 against Jazz Divisius, but knocked out Victoria Leonardo and got 109. I think that Jessica Andrade isn't patient enough, and she's going to force 𝗵𝐷𝐼𝐿 Silva's hand, which could result in a 𝗵𝐷𝐼𝐿 Silva step back counter right hand, or just 𝗵𝐷𝐼𝐿 Silva picking her apart en route to a finish. So I don't often call women's MMA finishes, but I think that 𝗵𝐷𝐼𝐿 Silva is live to get one here. So at 9,000, I'm willing to take a shot on the more elusive, the younger fighter in 𝗵𝐷𝐼𝐿 Silva at 9,000 to pick up a very, very solid win over Jessica Andrade.
Yeah, it's one of these things is, as I was just kind of, putting together kind of essentially a dummy lineup earlier today, one of the things that I was looking at was basically whether I'd want to take Burns or whether I took Andrade. And I was thinking that maybe Andrade is where I wanted to go in terms of that situation. But, it's, obviously we know in female MMA more times than not, it does tend to go over 2.5 rounds here. If you saw the Contender Series last night, I had a massive, brutal knockout in a female matchup where Dana White awards the contract right there. It's not even going to waste any time as she was a major underdog in terms of that one. Next up, we got Steve Garcia taking on Kyle Nelson. Steve Garcia is a minus 185 betting favorite. Kyle Nelson is plus 155. Garcia 8,600 on DK, where Nelson on the other side is 7,600. And it's one of those, Steve Garcia, he's one of those guys I almost feel like, at this weight class, typically I think when we talk about boom bust plays, I think we typically, for the most part, we talk about heavyweight action. But I think when you just talk about fighters who you just feel like are boom bust plays, Pete, I think ultimately Steve Garcia is that guy.
Yeah, I think it's both, right? I think Steve Garcia and Kyle Nelson, they are so untrustworthy, at least for me. I think I've gotten their fights incorrect more than anybody in the sport. So, I count Steve Garcia out because he's fought somebody in the New England scene that I'm pretty, familiar with. And I thought he lost that fight up here in New England years ago. But, in the UFC, outside the Mahashate loss and the short notice debut against Luis Pena, my man is on a run, knocking out Chase Hooper, Nurmagomedov, Costa, and most recently Choi. He's big for the division. He's powerful. That left hand lands. He blitzes forward. And not only that, he's aggressive. Jason, he's so aggressive that, he's mean. You know what I mean? He lives up to his name, the Mean Machine. He goes out there, and some fighters are violent. Some fighters are competitors. He's violent. And, as far as, the damage criteria, you can't ask more than what Steve Garcia does. If he gets taken down, he will elbow, and split his opponents open as much as possible. So, Steve Garcia at 8,600, naturally against a guy in Kyle Nelson, who I think is not good, you have my attention because how is Kyle Nelson on a 3-fight win streak? I just do not understand. Against Padilla, against Builder, and most recently against Bill Algeo. So it's that I am on in the sport. Pick your poison. I think I'd rather lose a bet by backing Steve Garcia than backing Kyle Nelson, who is a plotter. I swear to God, he closes his eyes and throws his combinations. He throws haymakers like crazy. Outside of making this a physical fight and implementing takedowns. I just think the youth, the athleticism, and the power resides with Steve Garcia. So I'm going to pick Steve Garcia. I've been fading him a lot, which has not worked out well and has made me look pretty silly. But if you tell me in these two fighters who I'm not high on, who I trust a little bit more, I guess I'm going to go with Steve Garcia because of the power and just that death touch. When he hits people, it seems to be quite different. So give me Steve Garcia here at 8,600. I think that he will put up a very good score as he has done in the past if he wins. 133, 94, 95, 108, 116. I think the loser of this matchup is really going to perform poorly. So you have to be on the right side of this one. But I think Kyle Nelson's going to try to slow things down, and I just don't know if he's going to have success doing so. He might get beat up while he's trying to slow things down. So give me Steve Garcia here at 8,600.
Yeah, when you talk about Steve Garcia, this was a matchup, 2 months ago or almost 3 months ago. We talked about his matchup against Troy, that was probably going to be the key to your lineup in terms of going out there and being able to take down a GPP. And he goes out there in just over 90 seconds, goes out there and gets a first-round victory. You mentioned about Kyle Nelson, and you talk about this, the stretch that he has been on here, unbeaten in his last 4 matchups. Of course, he was initially supposed to take on Calvin Kattar in this matchup. Calvin ends up pulling out of the matchup here. And now, of course, he's won 3 in a row. Prior to that, had a draw against Doo Ho Choi. But then when you think about prior to that Doo Ho Choi matchup, he was a guy that was probably going to be in line potentially to get cut by the UFC. He lost to Diego Ferreira, lost to Matt Sales, got a win against Polo Reyes, and then a loss against Billy Q, loss against Jai Herbert. So he was in that situation where likely the UFC was going to potentially cut him here. I mean, if you say, who do I have more faith in going out there and getting the victory and being a key to your GPP lineups, I do believe that is Steve Garcia. I believe Steve Garcia would be the guy that could go out there and get you 900 points. I think on the other side, Kyle Nelson, I think to me, his fantasy score upside ceiling is just a little bit lower here than Steve Garcia. But look, Steve Garcia has been on a nice little roll here as well. We talk about how he has won 4 in a row. And of course, all those victories have come by finish. So that's something to think about there as you're developing your lineups in terms of this one. Now, Pete, when you talk about another potential, a guy that is also, I think, probably a boom bust type player, that's Trevor Peek. Trevor Peek coming in here against Yanal is a minus 120 betting favorite. Even money for Yanal. Yanal is 8,000 on DK, where Trevor Peek is 8,200. And Trevor Peek is a guy that I'm very familiar with here on the East Coast of the United States. We've seen what he can do in the UFC, but also he's one of those guys that some people might say maybe you don't trust him.
Oh, man, I don't know, Jason. I just don't know. I mean, this is a GPP fight all day long between Trevor Peek and Yanal 𝐉𝐸 8,200, 8,000. I think anytime Trevor Peek fights, people are going to smash the under. You know what I mean? I think people are going to smash the under because they see what he brings to the table. He throws caution to the wind. He's throwing haymakers. He's a bar brawler, basically. But it seems like he's matured a little bit from his Dana White's Contender Series fight to his UFC debut where he picked up 2 knockdowns. It's 3 fights in a row he's gone the distance. Against Mariscal, 31 points. Yahya, 88 points. Campbell, 38 points. So he's still, swinging leather. And he's starting to implement takedowns, which I feel is an interesting wrinkle to add to his game because he really looked like a one-dimensional fighter breaking into the UFC. Trevor Peek looked like totally an amateur out there who eventually is inevitably going to get knocked out because of how sloppy he is. And now he's starting to be a little bit more patient and selective and then chain together takedowns and clinch when he needs to if he's not getting the better of an exchange. You have Yanal 𝐉𝐸 who, knocked out Sam Patterson in emphatic fashion. And picked up a beautiful first-round knockout at scoring 101 fantasy points. In 3 fights in the UFC, he's been the underdog all 3 times. And he lost the decision to Duncan, scoring only 14 points, but he did injure himself and break his arm or his shoulder or his hand or something like that, I forget, early on within that fight. And you know that Yanal 𝐉𝐸 is selective. has power in his hands as evidenced in the Patterson fight, has some wrestling, but I'm really intrigued to see who has the better wrestling. I know that 𝐒𝐻 comes from K-Dojo Warrior Tribe, which is a gym that I'm pretty familiar with as far as how talented they are and how they prep their fighters. I just don't know if I'm sold on 𝐒𝐻, though, to be honest. I think that people could be getting behind him because of the international experience and just kind of, breaking into the States. And, he seems like, I don't know. I think that people are just largely always going to undervalue Trevor Peek. And if Trevor Peek makes this a dogfight, I know I can count on Trevor Peek. I know that he's going to go out there and fight for your dollar. He's not even going to quit on himself, even if he's losing a match, and he's going to swing as hard as he can. And now he can start implementing takedowns. So I think that 𝐻 might look good in round 1, but Peek possesses a pace about him that I think few can match. So oddly enough, a guy that I thought sucked, straight up, I thought he was terrible. I think that Trevor Peek is going to get it done here. And I'm going to call a decision victory for Trevor Peek. I know that a lot of people, and including myself, when Trevor Peek fights, you kind of want to just put him in your lineups or put his opponent in your lineups because it's going to be an action-packed fight. But, I just have this sneaky suspicion that it's just going to be a Peek decision. But 8,200, 8,000, the salary makes it almost a must-have within your lineups. I think a way to get different is avoiding it. So I might avoid it in some of my big contests just to try to get an edge on the field. But the pick will be Peek.
Yeah, I mean, you make some great points there to talk about that roster construction there, and this is going to be an interesting week in terms of how you develop those rosters here. When you look at, that injury you're talking about, that was a broken wrist that he got there. I want to say it was in the first round he suffered it in the Duncan matchup, and of course he's not fought in 14 months, so a long time, and and that's one of those things of, and it kind of goes back to the conversation I was having with Zach 𝐼𝐸 the other day where, we were talking about, there's things we know when we're breaking down the fight and there's things we don't know. And obviously with Zach, the thing was, well, what's Zach look like after the first round? And, I think with Янal 14 months away, what's kind of been going on? Could we see, some changes in terms of, 14 months is a long time for a fighter to be, back in that gym, working on things to get there. So we'll see what happens there. Next up, we got 𝐉𝐸 taking on Padilla. 𝐉𝐸 minus 250 betting favorite, plus 205 for Padilla. Padilla 7,300 DK. 𝐉𝐸 is 8,900. Pete.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I will tell you that I'm semi-familiar with Taco Padilla just because he fought my friend Nate Andrews. Nate Andrews is was the CES lightweight champion. And had a great record as far as finishing his opponents, whether it was via KO, TKO, but mainly his submission skills. And him chaining together neck attacks, guillotines, stars chokes, anacondas. He was able to capitalize and get a victory over Padilla by putting together a pretty solid performance. But I remember Padilla bringing it to Nate, and I remember like, wow, this guy's tough. He's dog tough. And that was on display against James Lantop as a massive underdog on short notice. Lantop received his 4th backup, just accepted them all, and then Padilla came in and beat him. So I remember like not too many people played Chris Padilla, and he was priced at 6,900 and scored 113 fantasy points and broke the entire slate. So I think he definitely has improved since the years he fought my friend Nate. He's 14-6 overall. Some of his early losses are pretty damn ugly. You got a guy in 𝐉𝐸 who international talent with some questionable strength of schedule, developing a 25-5 record. I do think that 𝐉𝐸 can be categorized as a prospect though, because he left the UFC and picked up multiple victories, 3 victories on the road to UFC, which I don't think those fighters are anything special, but it's still under the bright lights, and it's kind of similar to fighting in the UFC, like the entire atmosphere. So 𝐉𝐸 has shown that he can score massively by beating the hell out of Jenkins and picking up a 3rd round TKO KO, landing 6 takedowns and scoring 146 fantasy points. Like, good God. I think what's going to happen here is Padilla is going to push the pace and try to implement his grappling as he does every fight. 𝐉𝐨𝐢𝐬 will be big. He can also land takedowns in his own right. And I also think that 𝐉𝐨𝐢𝐬 can hurt Padilla on the outside with his striking. So it's going to be a hell of a fight. It's one where there's definitely variance attached to it, and there's some volatility, of course. I think I will, if I'm playing a 150, I'll increase my Padilla exposure just because he seems like a fighter that has improved dramatically over the years. And I like to see him on a full camp as he is here now. I just think sometimes in these short notice fights, we sometimes have these short notice replacements have career best performances. And then when they get their full camps, it's like a letdown, and it's kind of odd. It should be the complete opposite. But a lot of times these short notice replacements come in here and they look amazing. Maybe it's because they have nothing to lose, and then the pressure builds with a full camp, and then they're up preparing for somebody, and then they just kind of look like slightly less version of themselves. I think that's what's going to happen here with Padilla. 𝐉𝐨𝐢's already acclimated to the UFC, so give me 𝐉𝐨𝐢 here at 8,900 to win a decision. But there's going to be a lot of pain in this matchup one way or another. 𝐉𝐨𝐢 putting a pace and damage on Padilla over 15 minutes.
Yeah, when you look at Chris Padilla and his return to the UFC, which of course was back there in April, comes in as a major underdog, over a 3-1 betting underdog there against On Top, and goes out there and gets that first round submission. And of course, prior to that, he went out and beat a UFC veteran in Justin James on the regional scene. Has gone on a nice little roll here since 2023, going out there and doing a good job here. And of course, Pete mentioned about what the path for 𝐉𝐨𝐢 has been in his return to the UFC. Of course, he was in the UFC back in 2022, ends up getting cut after that loss to Bahamondes, and now he has won 4 in a row, 3 of those wins coming in the road to the UFC, so that is something to pay attention to in terms of this one. And I just think it's probably one of those matchups that I don't know if I would get to a lot to in GPPs, but certainly could be a situation where you look at getting to that one in terms of what could be there, maybe get a little leverage there on the field in terms of that one. But we'll see what happens there. Next up, we talk about these 9,000 fighters, Pete, that you maybe have trust issues with, and I wonder how many of our listening audience maybe has trust issues with trusting Ryan Spann here as a 9,200 salary on DraftKings, taking on OSP. OSP is a 7,000 DK. He's a plus 265 betting underdog. Ryan Spann minus 350, and it's one of these things, and I feel like over the past couple of fights with OSP, we're always kind of like, well, maybe this is going to be the end of the OSP run in the UFC. And you know what? The guy is still coming along here in the UFC.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense to me, to be honest. It really doesn't make much sense to me. I think that OSP at 41 or 42, whatever he is, should be at the tail end of his career. Picking up a victory over Kennedy Nzechukwu makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. So he went out there and put a pace on Nzechukwu. I mean, what are we talking about here? 143 significant strikes landed, a knockdown, scored 97 fantasy points at 6,800. It's just like, what? Normally a low volume type of plotter, and OSP went out there and I don't know what he did, but he was able to throw triple the amount of strikes that he normally throws en route to a very nice victory. So I didn't think that was going to happen. I was hoping that Nzechukwu was going to go out there and put a pace on him and hit him with some shots and knock him out. It just never materialized. It never happened. You got Ryan Spann over there with all the potential in the world, and whether it's mental lapses or lack of dedication to the game, I don't know if he is not the most disciplined fighter in the world, but he has all the traits and skills to be one of the best in the division. It's just like he drops the ball consistently. He is consistently inconsistent. And I will say that, losing to Bogdan Guskov isn't a good look just because of you being the veteran and you having such a grappling advantage over him. And then allowing literally the only path to victory for Guskov is touching your chin. And that's exactly what happened. Ryan Spann's super chinny. He will get wobbled and hurt all the time, but he's a massive man for the division, and he has some of the best guillotines in the entire UFC. And I can honestly say that because when he hurts people, he snatches up the neck fantastic, especially on the regional scene too. So I think like if your chin's gone, you just got knocked out against Bogdan Guskov. I think, you can land strikes on the outside with OSP. What we've seen OSP knock out like the likes of Alonzo Menefield when he wasn't supposed to with a big left hand. So be careful of the power of OSP, who looks lethargic but is still powerful. Lean against OSP on the cage a little bit, reverse position, tax his body a little bit, and then try to hurt him with some strikes. And I actually think he's going to pick up a guillotine choke. OSP has that patented Von Preux choke where if you hold on to a guillotine and he gets inside control, he has his shoulder pressure, choke you out as a perfect guillotine counter. I think that could actually, the faith in that move could leave him a little hesitant to actually defending a guillotine choke from Ryan Spann, who has a beautiful high elbow guillotine and goes palm to palm with it as well. So I don't know why I'm so adamant that Ryan Spann's going to choke him out, but that's just what I'm seeing in my mind. So I'll probably be betting Ryan Spann via submission. It makes sense against a fatigued, tired OSP who's going to be going up against somebody who's equally as physical and as big as him.
The last time OSP won back-to-back fights?
God, it's got to be like 2016 or something weird.
2017 is the last time he has won back-to-back fights. At that point, he had won 3 in a row against Marcos Rogerio de Lima, Yushin Okami, and Corey Anderson. Since then, a lot of alternating wins and losses, some back-to-back losses here for Ryan Spann. And this is probably a matchup that we've talked about this line over the past couple of shows here is we are in UFC cut season because you are going to start getting rid of fighters because of all the additions of the Contender Series fighters. I think I saw something the other day. The UFC has like 800 fighters now. I mean, it is amazing how many fighters UFC has here. But, it's one of those things of it's tough for me to trust Ryan Spann, even though of what OSP is here. But, look, it's – I would be fearful if he goes to the ground with OSP just because of what OSP could potentially do there. But I just don't know if there's a high fantasy score upside. That's just and maybe that's just a personal thing with that. I've put Spann in lineups and he just hasn't come through on me because as DFS players, I think we kind of never forget that.
Yeah, for sure. I think like for Spann having such a fantastic coach, you would expect more of game planning. You would expect more of patience in certain moments. You would expect more of a strategic chess mindset. It's kind of still like some amateur tendencies out there. And you're talking about a guy who has, a ton of wins. But it's just like you have 21 victories, but yet you're still going out there as one of the best round one fighters in the game. And it's just like, well, we'll see. We'll flip a coin. I don't want a coin flip as a big favorite, but I do think that Ryan Spann is the rightful side.
Next up, we have got the biggest betting favorite on the card. That is Isaac Dulgarian, who is a minus 3,000 betting favorite, taking on Brandon Marat. Marat plus 1,100. He's 6,300 on DK. I feel like we've never seen 6,300. I really feel like we've never seen this price tag. And 9,900. Like I'm thinking like when Valentin Shevchenko was these massive betting favorites, we did not see 9,900, Pete.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, this is crazy. It's crazy. I've never seen 9,900, 6,300. But goodness gracious. I mean, like, let's talk about Isaac Dulgarian. I mean, his wrestling and his ground and pound and his pressure and his pace, I think he's going to be a raked fighter. I really do. I think that he's so damn talented and so good that people could be sleeping on him a little too much. Brendan Marat, I just don't think that this is a favorable matchup. Going up against Terrence McKinney on short notice, one of the best round one fighters out there next to Ryan Spann, or should I say half round fighters out there next to Ryan Spann, and now, following that up against Isaac Dulgarian, definitely not like the easiest path in your UFC career. Like the 2 fights to kick off your career, it's just like, goodness gracious, they're not doing him any favors. And then you throw in the fact that he's training at Syndicate. So it's just like, man. And I know Brendan Marat personally. We trained out in New Mexico. I'm going to root for the kid. I'm going to root for the kid. I mean, we trained together. I'm going to root for him. I hope that he pulls off one of the biggest upsets, if not the biggest upset in UFC history. Personally, I just don't see it happening, though. Like, I just don't see it happening. I think that there's a certain type of fighter that can beat Brendan Marat. There's multiple types, but I think that the worst type of matchup is going up against a powerhouse wrestler with good ground and pound. I really feel like 𝐷𝐿garian will take Marat down, put him in a bad spot, and I'm kind of seeing him putting the hooks in and laying ground and pound while Marat's flattened out on the canvas. So I hope that Marat goes out there and pulls it off. He has some good striking about him. He is aggressive, but I think that his aggressiveness will be used against him here. And it's just not an easy matchup in your second UFC fight to go up there against Isaac 𝐷𝐿garian. So 𝐷𝐿garian priced at $9,900, kind of an untouchable price tag, but you can already pencil him in for 100 fantasy points. It's just like, I don't necessarily know if it's necessary on a card like that. Like, we got some other fighters that I'm willing to take shots on, and the price tag is restrictive. So personally, I'll be rooting for Brendan. I hope that he does well. But there's much easier fights than he could have had in his second UFC fight.
Yeah, to me, it's about the price tag here. I'm sitting there and saying, man, if 𝐷𝐿garian doesn't go out there and get you 120 points, and because of how much you have to pay up for him, that to me could be the struggle. Say if you're going to play 10 lineups, maybe play 𝐷𝐿garian. Let's just say maybe 3 or 4 of those lineups, and maybe try to get a little different. But of course, if you're playing 𝐷𝐿garian, that means you're probably looking at multiple underdogs, and probably you're looking at those main event and the co-main event there. Next up, we got Felipe dos Santos taking on Andre Lima. Lima is a minus 180 betting favorite, 8,500 on DK. Or Dos Santos is a plus 150 betting underdog, and he's 7,700 on DK, Pete.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I think that this matchup is compelling, right? Because you have Andre Lima, a guy that we really don't have a good read on, right? Like, he had the weirdest fight ever against Severino, where there was about 6 fouls between the two of them, of Andre Lima grabbing the cage and grabbing shorts and poking eyes and doing all sorts, leading to Severino pulling off one of the worst fouls ever next to Mike Tyson and biting his opponent so bad that he was able to get it tattooed onto his bicep. Then you have Andre Lima go up against a short notice replacement and Mitch Raposo from the New England scene, and he really didn't impress me at all. Like, I know that Raposo is really good and really talented and tricky on the feet with his movement and his takedown attempts, but landing only 51 significant strikes when you're supposed to be this phenomenal kickboxer and Muay Thai practitioner is just left me scratching my head thinking maybe we have this guy overvalued. Like, maybe he's just tremendously overvalued. Priced initially at $9,000 against Severino, priced at $8,600 against Raposo. I mean, this fight against Dos Santos, priced at $8,500. I mean, Dos Santos did step up on short notice against Manel Kape and gave him an absolute war, priced at $6,900. And then he, in a matchup against Victor Altamirano, was taken down a billion times, but was still somehow given the nod, which I don't necessarily know if that was a correct decision. I don't think Felipe dos Santos wants to be in a matchup against the guy that has takedown upside. This matchup against Andre Lima, I don't think he has to worry about that. I think that Andre Lima will willingly strike with Felipe dos Santos. Dos Santos will crash forward. Dos Santos is okay with getting takedowns in his own right. I just think that Andre Lima is a little overvalued, for my opinion. I think this fight is close. And the idea of Andre Lima is a guy out there who's going to pick all these guys apart, looks very technical on the feet, and will finish people. But if you dive deeper, I mean, he will go the distance. And we've already seen that happen against Mitch Raposo, a guy on short notice. So it's a long-winded way for me to say that I think I'm going to pick Felipe dos Santos, training at Diego Lima Shoot the Box. It's a close fight. I think that Dos Santos hasn't even shown his best version of himself inside the UFC, and against Manel Kape, one of the best fighters in the division, he went out there and he did damn well. He scored 40 in a loss. So I think that there is tremendous upside for a guy that's relatively unknown for the market. So give me Felipe dos Santos here at 7,700 as a lean. As a bet, I would probably stay away. But for DFS, I'm completely fine with taking a shot on dos Santos at 7,700, especially because I know that he has good striking, and I actually think that he could possibly look to take down Andre Lima too.
Yeah, it's one of these things. As I was just kind of looking at my spreadsheet and listening, kind of what you were talking about there, and thinking like, man, like outside of main event, co-main event underdogs, there may not be a lot of underdogs you love this week.
No, it's these cards now, right? Like massive, it's starting to be PFL and Bellator, but not quite. I mean, but like,
come on, don't get that level.
The Bellator prelims or the PFL. Imagine if we had to do PFL DFS. It would be very difficult. It would be very difficult.
So, I mean, speaking of that, there is a Bellator card on Saturday as well.
See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it is the Usman. It's the Nurmagomedov Shelby as the main event. I know. I did see they actually, because Bellator actually has fight cards on back-to-back weeks. They actually lost their main event for next week. That was supposed to be Johnny Eblen and Fabian Edwards. I'm sure I have not even looked at the Bellator card in terms of the betting odds. Oof. Usman is a 4-1 betting favorite against Shelby. Not a lot of huge matchups here in terms of the betting odds here. Maybe you like Douglas Lima. Looking at DraftKings Sportsbook plus 114 against Aaron Jeffrey. Ckelley is even money against Lorenz Larkin at minus 122.
Aaron Jeffrey, that's who he's fighting.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, I like Lima there. I mean, Jeffrey's good, but I don't think he's beating Lima.
Look, I'm a huge Douglas Lima guy just because of, when I was doing that traveling Bellator, he was always around. I just wonder, he's at this stage of his career, what's there for him. I mean, still, I will say this, man, been around a lot of fighters throughout the MMA journey.
He's the biggest guy ever.
How he made 170.
I remember. He's huge, dude. Yeah. So I mean, I'm a big Douglas Lima guy. I think Jeffrey's good when he's a better striker than his foe. I don't think that he's a better striker than Lima. He'll bring a pressure and he'll probably get calf kicked into oblivion, and then we'll see Lima pick up a nice victory.
I'll never forget when Bellator did their initial pay-per-view. Lima was injured at this point. I want to say he had some type of arm injury. And we were walking around Memphis, and I'm just in my head, I'm going, he had to be 220, had to be.
Oh, all day long. He's huge.
Yeah, I mean, just one of those things of he knew how to cut weight good, and man, yeah, just massive. But yeah, Bellator does have so maybe if you're looking to put some parlays together here, I mean, look, I will say this: I think Usman Nurmagomedov. I think you could make a case that he's top 3 lightweights in the world, but unfortunately, because of who he's going to be fighting, whether he ever gets that notoriety of being a top lightweight in the world, really time to see. And really it's going to come down to the type of fighters Bellator and PFL can ultimately acquire over the next couple of months or so. Next up, we've got 𝐉𝐨 and take on Gabriel Santos. Gabriel Santos, a minus 275 betting favorite in terms of this one, and this is his first fight since June of 2023. He has lost back-to-back fights, taking on 𝐉𝐨, who is a plus 225 betting underdog, 7,400 DK, where Santos is 8,800. But when you look at Santos' losses in UFC, Pete, we're talking Lerone Murphy and David Onama, both quality losses.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is a very interesting matchup between 𝐉𝐨 and Gabriel Santos. I think people might be underestimating 𝐉𝐨 a little bit, just as far as his skill set, like what he brings to the table. 𝐉𝐨 is a fantastic grappler offensively, very, very good wrestling, great pace about him as well. We saw against Lee, he landed 5 takedowns in 8.5 minutes of control time. And then on the road to UFC, he went out there and picked up some excellent armbar finishes and demonstrated how he's back and he's talented. And, on the feet, I think he's serviceable. I don't think that he's good. From a pace and a wrestling standpoint, if your takedown defense is not up to par, he will exploit it. But the best way to really counter his game is to implement your own takedowns on him, because I'm not all that impressed with his takedown defense. And I do think that Gabriel Santos, despite having a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background and a Muay Thai style, like he can get takedowns in his own right. We saw him get 5 takedowns against Lerone Murphy, 2 takedowns against David Onama, and that was only in the second round. I think that despite the lack of technical wrestling from Gabriel Santos, he finds a way to take his opponents down, and his jiu-jitsu is excellent. His striking is better than 𝐒𝐻. If I had to look at this slate as a whole, which underdog could score decently well in a loss, I think that 𝐒𝐻 would fit that criteria because of the significant wrestling pressure, the significant wrestling upside that he brings to the table. On the flip side, though, I don't really think that his takedown defense is at the same level as his takedown offense. So I think that if Gabriel Santos picks up on that, implements his own takedowns, puts him in a compromising situation, backpacks him, or even it's on the feet, Gabriel Santos is definitely the better fighter. He has the more explosiveness about him. He throws high kicks, throws knees up the middle, jumping attacks, just powerful combinations. And not to mention, he's fought the better competition in the UFC. Like Lerone Murphy beat the hell out of Edson Barboza in a main event months ago. And then David Onama has some of the best power for the division and one of the most slept-on fighters in the division as well. So, this is a nice spot for Gabriel Santos to come in here and pick up a good win. My issue is, maybe Santos isn't what we thought from his debut against Lerone Murphy. Maybe he's good and he's very solid, but he's nothing spectacular. So the odds are somewhat wide for my liking. I probably would have liked Santos at 8,500 just because of the pace that 𝐒𝐻 can push. But when I look at 𝐒𝐻, Jason, I really feel like he's a bantamweight. I feel like this guy would be fantastic at bantamweight. For featherweight, he's a decent size, but his skill set and just what he brings to the table really looks like a bantamweight type of fighter. So I think Santos would be way too big, way too strong, and have an edge in all areas. And I actually think that he will pick up either a late submission or a decision here against 𝐒𝐻 after being put in some tough spots from the good wrestler in 𝐒𝐻. And with all that being said, I would probably increase my exposure to 𝐒𝐻 from an underdog standpoint just because of the wrestling upside. But I do think that Santos gets it done. I think that Santos gets it done, and he is very talented. He's young. He's well-rounded, much more well-rounded than 𝐒𝐻. And that'll be on display here. But the odds are just a little too wide for me to really plant a flag on Santos to get it done.
Yeah, no, the minus 275 number definitely does stick out to you there in terms of that one. Next, we got a female matchup where Vanessa Demopoulos in a very familiar role here as a sizable betting underdog, plus 250. She's won her last 2 fights where she was at least a plus 200 betting underdog as well. Take on Jacqueline here, who's 9,000 and minus 320 on the betting lines. Demopoulos 7,100. And when you look at Jacqueline here, I mean, she since coming into the UFC, of course, she lost her debut against Sam Hughes, but now has won back-to-back fights, and both of those victories have come via finish beat.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, I don't know if Demopoulos is she has blackmail over some of the officials or what's going on, but some of the decisions that are kind of being tilted in her favor are very questionable. I mean, she is 4-1 in her past 5, 5-1 in her past 6. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, Gomez Juarez submission win, Jinu Frey decision, Oliveira decision win, lost the decision to Kovacevic, decision win over Murata and to Cody. So it's just goodness gracious. I mean, yes, maybe Vanessa Demopoulos has turned a corner and she's graduated from being a punching bag that was showcased against J.J. Aldrich and on the Contender Series into a fighter that swings really hard. She throws with really bad intentions. Maybe that gets the attention of the judges. She also attempts Beautiful blast double legs. Maybe making noise as she's striking is what's doing it too. I'm not really sure, but it's kind of surprising to see her being on this run right now. I don't think she's all that great, Jason. I think that her jiu-jitsu is solid. She's picked up a beautiful armbar victory over 𝐉𝐨𝐲𝐻𝑍. Some control time in other fights, almost 9 minutes of control time against Oliveira, 4.5 against Jinh Yu Frey, minute and 40 seconds against Kanako Murata. I just don't think that her game is just not going to work against Jacqueline Emerim, in my opinion. I think that Emerim is the better striker of the two. Maybe she doesn't hit as hard as Vanessa Demopoulos, who throws thunder in each strike. I think that Emerim is clearly the better jiu-jitsu practitioner and wrestler. And if Emerim gets her in a compromising position, why can't she finish her? And guess what? If Demopoulos isn't going to tap, you just give the referee no choice but just land and ground and pound until the referee steps in and intervenes, because I think that Emerim's positional control is just next level. We saw her submit McKenna pretty easily inside of round 1. Picked up a beautiful finish over Ruiz. And losing to Sam Hughes really doesn't bother me, right? Like, Sam Hughes is tough. She's dog tough. And if you have a flaw in your game, Sam Hughes will be live and be testing you in all areas. And then once she notices where you have a flaw, she's going to look to capitalize and slow burn on you, especially if you have a deteriorating cardio. So it's a long way for me to say that I really like Jacqueline Emerim this week, Jason. And usually I don't get behind these big women's MMA favorites, but like Natalia Silva and Jacqueline Emerim, that's like 1A, 1B for me. Like, I really like both of them this week, and I think that they both have some sneaky finishing upside. Vanessa Demopoulos, super tough, hasn't been finished in a professional career. That could change. That could really change when you have a world champion on your back, implementing ground and pound properly, training at one of the best facilities in the entire game. Or maybe Emerim is just so damn talented that she just breaks the slate with tons of takedowns and control time. So I'm down for having Jacqueline Emerim and Natalia Silva in my lineup. So 9,100 Emerim. I'd rather be early than late. So give me Emerim to put on a hell of a fight and dominate Vanessa Demopoulos.
One of the things about Vanessa, she's been through a couple of gyms over the past couple of years now. Pretty much, if we look at her Instagram, it looks like now pretty much splitting her time between Las Vegas and Denver. I know she's been in Denver, I want to say probably about a year now. After she left Arizona, was in California prior to that. But one of the things I always think about Vanessa, like when I'm looking at these underdogs in that 7,000, 72, 73, 7,400 range is just, can it give me volume? And that's what scares me about Vanessa Demopoulos, that, if I wanted to go in terms of that one. Next up, we got 𝗃𝐿 taking on 𝐵uCa. 𝐵uCa +2 +230 betting underdog, -284 𝗃𝐿. Dylan 6,900, while Andre is 9,300. And 𝗃𝐿, another one of those guys that you always feel like you necessarily can't trust him in putting him into your GPP lineups.
I think that 𝗃𝐿 having a wide line attached to him as a massive favorite is just a mistake. I think his skills, it makes sense. Like, his skills are the -300 favorite that he is. But his durability is not. And sometimes durability is like crucial, and that comes before skills. Because I don't know. I know it was a fluke thing, but ever since that he knocked himself out against Jacob Malkoun's hip, I'm kind of like, now I'm not out of the business of Andre 𝗃𝐿, but I'm very selective. And if he's going up against a guy that doesn't have any wrestling to his name or any grappling to his name, then I'm probably going to back Andre 𝗃𝐿, because I do view him as a fantastic grappler and a very solid wrestler. His jiu-jitsu is probably the most slept on part of his game. He has a beautiful anaconda, Darce choke variation where he can switch between the two. Just good head and arm series. His striking's and his gas tank, it looks like he's fatigued and tired throughout, but he's able to push through it as long as he's the one in the driver's seat. I mean, we haven't really seen him met with much resistance because he's usually the more physically imposing and stronger fighter in there, especially in the grappling department. I find this matchup interesting. And do I think that 𝐷𝐿𝐵 is excellent? No, I don't. But the one thing that 𝐷𝐿𝐵, the mindless Hulk, has is that he's dabbled within the heavyweight division between wrestling throughout his upbringing. I saw his record in high school was like 89-5 or something like that. So like he's a very talented wrestler at a much higher weight class, and then he's also competed in MMA at higher weight classes than what they're going to fight at now. I just think he's very physical. He pins his opponents to the cage. Which will he be able to take down Andre Petroski? Probably not as much as he's used to taking normal people down. But can Andre Petroski take him down like he's used to taking people down and controlling them? Maybe. I think that Budka in some of the regional tape that I did watch, in moments he has some very good takedown defense, and in some other ones when he's gotten tired, he's been able to get mounted and put in bad positions. If two wrestlers and two grapplers get into a fight and they nullify each other's strengths, and it becomes a kickboxing or a boxing match, are you trusting Andre Petroski at -300 at 9,300 price tag? I mean, I don't necessarily know if I can get to that as far as like if that type of fight occurs. If that type of fight occurs, I think that Budka's blitzes, where he blitzes into the pocket with big explosive punch combinations, I could totally see him hitting Petroski and it just taking one shot to plant him down en route to some ground and pound in for a finish. 𝗿𝐻𝐵HIH knocked out Petroski, but that is 𝗿𝐻𝐵HIH. Jacob Malkoun's hip did knock out Petroski, but that is Malkoun's hip. We're talking about Dylan Budka here, so I'm willing to dabble. And I just don't agree with the price tag. I agree with the skills of Petroski. He's probably the better kickboxer because he kicks more than Budka does. Budka predominantly will throw big haymakers into, clashing into the pocket. I think the wrestling is interesting because what happens if Budka is able to take him down as a former heavyweight? Like, can he just fatigue Petroski because he's putting him under duress and making him work? Maybe. And then maybe Budka is able to hurt him or get a decision. I mean, Budka in general is just a pace pusher and priced at 6,900 in a fight where I don't agree with the price attached to the favorite. I'm probably going to be a little bullish on it. Stranger things have happened, and sometimes one big shot's all it takes. Give me the youth. Give me the athleticism. Give me it shouldn't happen, but it did. Give me Dylan Budka here at 6,900. I know it doesn't make much sense logically, but for GPP, sometimes you have to dabble and pick certain fighters to really make your lineups easy. I'm okay with Dylan Budka at 6,900, even in a loss. I just think that he can do enough to possibly make the rest of your lineup work, and I think he's going to be unique enough where not a lot of people are going to want to get to him. So give me Budka here at 6,900 to possibly pull off the upset over Andre Petroski.
And when you talk about the wins Petroski has had in the UFC, outside of that win early on his UFC run against Nick Maximov, they have come by decision. I think it's another aspect of, at 9,300, if he goes out there and has a great performance, and let's just say it's a decision victory, can he go out there and get you that fantasy score upside that you're looking for in terms of that one? And then our opening fight of the night is actually a fight that we broke down a couple of weeks ago. It was scratched after the weigh-ins with Fletcher being pulled from the match against 𝗿𝐺𝐻𝐿. Fletcher is still the betting favorite here at -140, 𝗿𝐺𝐻𝐿 plus 120, 8,300 on DK, and then 7,900 for the underdog here, Pete.
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick Flip here. I mean, I was on Nathan Fletcher, and for good reason, right? Nathan Fletcher brings great grappling, good wrestling to every fight. I think that he may be somewhat undersized for 145 pounds. And I think that Zygmunt's Ramovska is just pretty damn big for the weight class. In a fight that was supposed to happen a week or two ago, makes me scratch my head as like, why? So I dove into it, and Nathan Fletcher actually was pulled because of staph infection. Let me tell you, I haven't had staph, but I've been put on antibiotics while prepping for grappling tournaments and competing in a grappling tournament, which is still not a fight. And I know fighters that have fought with antibiotics in their system, you are drained. You are absolutely drained, and you are a shell of yourself. So while Nathan Fletcher may look good early, 𝐒𝐫𝐸𝐺's scrambling ability, the threatening guillotine chokes, the never-ending guillotine chokes, the better striking than Nathan Fletcher, I think it all just tilts in 𝐒𝐫𝐸𝐺's favor. Like, I have to pick him here. I have to pick him here despite 𝗄𝐆's tendency to be put on his back constantly. Every single fight that you watch of 𝗄𝐆's MMA career, I think that every person's landed a takedown against him. But somehow he's able to get back up, or he's able to threaten with a guillotine choke. Nathan Fletcher on the regional scene was putting a guillotine choke so deep that the referee didn't even see it, but he grabbed the cage to help get some leverage to pull himself out of the guillotine, to help him roll to his side, and he got out of the guillotine because of the cage pull. 𝗄𝐆 could easily guillotine Nathan Fletcher here. This also could be Nathan Fletcher gets his takedowns when he wants, as he should. If he was fully healthy, I think that he gets the takedowns when he wants, avoids getting his neck snatched up, limits the amount of striking exchanges with 𝐒𝐫𝐸𝐺. But then the conversation comes down, damage versus control. I think control is going to be favoring Nathan Fletcher at 8,300. And since he's the favorite, I don't necessarily love that. I know the damage will be on 𝐒𝐫𝐸𝐺's side. You have Fletcher coming off of staph infection. You have 𝗄𝐆 being more powerful, being bigger. Give me 𝐒𝐫𝐸𝐺 to win a decision here. But it's an intriguing fight, and one where, like, I can see a bunch of different ways that this can go. From a betting standpoint, I'd probably dabble on the 𝗄𝐆 submission prop just because I think it's interesting enough to put some money on it. But it's just enough for me to get off the favorite in Nathan Fletcher. So give me 𝐒𝐫𝐸𝐺 at 7,900.
Of course, we are going to give you our straight up 5 picks here in a moment. Of course, if you got any questions, you can line those up in the chat right now, whether it's on YouTube. Also, you can line those up in Discord. I know we got a couple of Discord questions that are already in there. We'll get to those here in a moment. Let's get into our straight up picks here. In the main event, I'm going to go Sean Brady.
Sean Brady.
Call me crazy. Give me the underdog number 1, Jessica Andrade.
Stop it. Give me 𝐷ALIA Silva.
I'll go Steve Garcia.
Yeah, Steve Garcia.
Trevor Peek.
Trevor Peek.
I will say 𝗏𝐠.
𝗏𝐠.
Oh, man.
Stop.
I mean, I'm going to go Ryan Spann, but, man, I don't. Do you trust either one of them?
No, but I think I trust Ryan Spann more in 2024 than I do. I mean, I just can't see it.
Yeah, Dulgarian.
Yeah, Dulgarian.
I'll go Lima.
Give me underdog Dos Santos.
Give me Santos.
Gabriel Santos.
I'll go Jacqueline.
Jacqueline Amarim.
I'll go Petrosky.
Screw it. I'm going Dylan Budka straight up.
I'll take 𝗄𝐆.
Yeah, 𝗄𝐆 for me.
Samuel, appreciate the super chat there. As always, man, much appreciated there. Of course, we do have memberships now available here on the YouTube channel, so you can check that out. We set that up this week. So if you got any questions, be sure to line those up right now. We'll get into it. I know we'll go over to Discord. Of course, our Discord channel, totally free to get in here. First question, Tristan, best leverage play?
Best leverage play on the slate. I mean, from the top end, I think it's 𝐷ALIA Silva, just because it's women's MMA and her box score isn't the best. From the bottom end, I want to say Dylan Budka, but maybe I'm wrong on that. What's your thoughts on it?
I mean, looking at that low end, I don't mind the Dylan call as a low end leverage type spot play.
I think I got a better one for us, and I think it makes more sense from a leverage standpoint. It's probably Kyle Nelson, because I think most people will be on the Steve Garcia side.
I know. I'm with you there. Best takedown upside. Do you start looking at Dulgarian as a top potential there? Brady.
Yeah, it's just the worry that 1 or 2 is all it needs. You know what I mean? It's probably it's Sean Brady 1 for me for takedown upside.
Ranking the 9K options. So we've got Silva, we got Spann, Dolgarian, Jacqueline, and Petrosky.
Well, I'm just gonna put Dolgarian 1 just because I think it's 100 points. It's restrictive, but he's definitely 1. 2 for me is gonna be 𝐉𝐸𝐸𝐵. 3 Spann, 4 Silva, 5 Petrosky. You know me, I'm not a big Petrosky guy this week, but my fear with Petrosky is that he does catch a submission over Dylan Budka because he is sneaky with his jiu-jitsu.
Sam's got his usual question here. Top core plays. When I'm thinking about, I would love to get to Dolgarian, but to me, it just becomes a roster aspect of it. I mean, it should be essentially a showcase type fight for him, you would imagine. But the problem is if you go in, you start creating a lineup in Dolgarian, you're going to sit there and go, oof, how low do I got to go with other places?
Yeah, it just doesn't. From what I've done with it, it doesn't allow me to get to the matchups I want to get to. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm trying to have X amount of matchups within my lineups, and I'm only able to get maybe 2 or 3 instead of 4 or 5.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to pull it up here because I was thinking about, because I know we have another question about cash games, and I think as a cash game, I'd probably be more interested in getting Dolgarian just because feeling how confident I get there. But I'm just going to sit there and. So if you start your lineup with Dolgarian, and let's just say you throw in Burns, then your average remaining per player is 8,150. Just kind of give you an idea of what you do.
Put Brady in instead of Burns.
7,850. Yeah, I mean,
that diamond a little bit. I mean, it's workable. You definitely can, but you're gonna miss the entire mid range.
I think in terms of if it's a cash contest, I would say, you know what? Let me try to figure out, can I put together a cash lineup with Dolgarian that I just don't feel dirty about?
Yeah.
I mean, that's where, I mean, look, you're gonna have to kind of go down there. I mean, obviously, if you want to. You kind of want to ride the, backing off the Petrosky train, and you want to put Dylan in at 6,900. Then it starts to make more sense of how you develop that in there. For sure,
I totally agree.
Let's move over to Sam's next question: best inside the distance fight and fighters. I mean, look, I think we know Steve Garcia's history, so he's definitely an inside the distance type fighter. I mean, I would. Overall, be surprised if Spann St. Preux goes 15 minutes. I mean, I think that's a fight. And then looking at some other ones that stick out to me. Dolgarian would be another one to go out there and get the finish. Overall, I think Andrade Silva goes the distance. I think Burns Brady goes the distance.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Dolgarian inside the distance, the Spann inside the distance, and the Steve Garcia inside the distance. I think that makes sense. You could just pick a fighter from those matchups and put him inside the distance, or you could play the unders in all of them. I do think though that the Spann and OSP fight could touch like round 2 or round 3, so that under over is kind of at a touchy spot. Even though Ryan Spann is predominantly one of the best round 1 finishers in the game, I think as a guy that's lost a lot. He's lost 3 in a row now. His coach is going to be on him to minimize mistakes. So capitalize on errors of your opponent, minimize your own mistakes, be a little bit more patient in there instead of rushing. Because he rushes things, and that's how he loses.
Top punt plays. The punt play for me would be Jessica Andrade at 7,200.
Okay. You can talk me into it. Punt play for me is Dylan Budka.
Best decision odds, fights, and fighter favorite parlays. To me, best decision odds for going the distance, I think, is main event, co-main event. If I'm looking to play a parlay, and I think there's some, I would look at, I'd probably go maybe like a Brady, a Steve Garcia, and if I was going to throw a third one in there, I'd probably go I might go Trevor Peek, and that would be a fairly nice 3-fighter parlay.
Yeah, I know. I just Trevor Peek, that 𝐼𝐠 Peek fight, you feel like you're going to be wrong on it. You know what I mean? That's the take I have with it. I'm picking Peek, but what is my confidence level on it? Probably a 6 out of 10. But I'm still picking Peek. I would agree though that does allow you to have some juicy odds instead of like having Dulgarian as your third part of the parlay. It doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, I was just pulling up to see if I did that as a parlay. So I got Brady
plus 175.
Yeah, not bad parlay there in terms of that one.
Was I right? Was it plus 175?
Because
I just did that on my head, like top of my head. Jason's over here just
I've got
thinking I'm right.
For some reason, they do not have the Steve Garcia fight listed.
I hate how they do that, where they have it as like 2 separate events or 3 separate events.
Yeah, they even have it listed on the Hard Rock app right now. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, it's only Wednesday, so I'm sure it'll be up there later on this week. The other questions that Sam had put in here, Jason and Pete specials. The first fight of the night, I don't mind getting to it. I'd probably maybe Moscow at 7,900 be going there. And then, we just talked about the 𝗃 fight in terms of that one. Road to the Manchester Series, over under 6.5.
I think it's a good number.
I do too.
I think I might say less.
Yeah. Best leverage rank plays. Not sure exactly what he meant by that.
Best leverage rank plays?
I mean, maybe he's asking to rank the leverage plays.
Maybe. I mean, that's a.
I mean, look, I would imagine that when we're talking about ownership, the main event will have a decent sized ownership on both sides of the equation. I think people will be looking to take a shot on Burns, obviously with Brady, but then I think you brought up a really good one in Kyle Nelson as potentially being a leverage play. People may be looking to get more to Steve Garcia because of that finishing upside there. Maybe a Felipe dos Santos is another leverage play.
Yeah, and I think like leverage plays can also be in the mid range or the upper tier as well, like kind of lost in the shuffle. I mean, I can give you 3 that kind of are ones we haven't really touched on all that much, like 𝗏𝐠, just kind of put an asterisk next to him. Gabriel Santos, there's a lot of hype behind him, so maybe he goes a little bit more owned than he should be. But also Andre Lima, like those 3 within that range are kind of like ones where the market necessarily might have an incorrect read on what they are. So, and whether I'm right, Jason's right, or we're wrong, I think that it could result in some interesting scores or interesting results in their fight. So I'm excited for the fight card, Jason. I think it's going to be pretty solid.
Yeah, and of course, this leads up to our pay-per-view next week. Of course, the card at the Spear, headlined by Sean O'Malley and 𝗏𝐺 Dvalishvili. I feel like 𝗏𝐺 is just trolling everyone on social media at this point. I mean, it is, as we look ahead, because this is something we do want to do here at the end of the show, starting to look ahead to next week. And O'Malley, and this is a matchup where O'Malley has a chance to silence all the haters. I mean, this is his opportunity to shut a lot of people up when it comes to saying, hey, he's had the path that you would want. Now he's taking on a guy that can bring that pace, can bring that wrestling.
I am not going to be hating on Sean O'Malley. I've been tooting the Sean O'Malley horn for a very long time. Obviously if 𝗏𝐺 gets his hands on Sean O'Malley and starts to implement his wrestling, it makes it a much more favorable matchup for 𝗏𝐺. I just think that the in-betweens and getting inside a range is a lot more difficult than what people are alluding to. I'm going to be backing Sean O'Malley. I'm telling you right now. I think he's going to knock 𝗏𝐺 out cold. If Henry Cejudo is stifling and hurting 𝗏𝐺, if Marlon Moraes is hurting 𝗏𝐺, what is Sean O'Malley going to do with his probing straight shots, his elusiveness? I think it's going to be in emphatic fashion. Way worse than the Aljamain Sterling knockout. It wasn't even a knockout. It was a finish. But I think he's going to pick up a very big knockout over 𝗏𝐺. I could be wrong. 𝗏𝐺 could go out there and Peter Yan him and take him down 35 times in 25 minutes. But I don't think that's going to happen. So my money will be on Sugar Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially the fact that he's got the reach advantage in that matchup. If he can stay on the outside, and you got to imagine he's going to be targeting that eye because, once again,
what an idiot. What an idiot. And also, people just don't think that Sean has any grappling to him at all. We could see Merab go for a takedown and leave his neck out there and Sean O'Malley guillotine him. You know what I mean? Or attempt a guillotine to get out of a position because, there needs to be respect in all areas for your opponents. And I feel like nobody respects Sean's ground game because he just hasn't had to show it. He's been working on it. He knows. He's been working with Tim Welch and doing grappling tournaments. You know what I mean? So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things and you may not always agree with how Dana says things, but a couple weeks ago when he said in a press conference and he goes, sometimes our fighters do some dumb things. And, in boxing camps, nothing ever leaks out. I mean, but in MMA, I
can't wait to go to social media. Yeah.
Sometimes just be quiet. Be quiet because now you've just literally told the team. You think Tim Welch didn't say, ooh, okay. But
so stupid.
Of course, also you've got the co-main event is Shevchenko and Grasso, Ortega taking on 𝐷IEGO as well, and that's one of those more interesting matchups. And to see, I think 𝐷IEGO. This is, I feel like the UFC believes they have something in 𝐷IEGO here. He's just under a 2-1 betting favorite against Ortega.
Yeah. Oh, he's the favorite, huh? Big time, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to do some more tape study. We've already broken that fight down. You guys know 𝐷IEGO is my boy. I like him a lot. Wouldn't say it was a bad performance against Dan Ige, but I think that there were some parts of his game that you were kind of like, okay, well, he's human, right? A lot of people think these these finishers, they're not human and they could just, pull off crazy finishes time and time again. And credit to Dan Ige, he's tough as hell. He's a gatekeeper. But for the Shevchenko and Grasso rematch and for the Ortega and 𝐷IEGO fight, I'm going to be putting in some hard work when it comes to the fight film in preparation for it. But I'm excited. I hope 𝐷IEGO capitalizes on a situation like this. At the Sphere, UFC kind of knows, they know what they're doing. They put both of those guys on that date. It's kind of the perfect storm for either one of them. So I'm excited to see it. And what's there, only 10 fights or 12 fights on that card? There's nothing crazy, I think.
Yeah. It's not a huge amount of fights on it. And of course, I'm interested to see what it looks like on television. I'll be next weekend. I'll be in Detroit, so it'll probably be me watching it on my phone. I mean, it'll probably. It's
boy over there.
It's football season, man. It's football season. It's our schedule's a unique one this year. We're at home this weekend. Got the Commanders. Then we have one road game, and then I think we have 2 or 3 home games in a row. There is a stretch at one point in the season. I think we're on the road 5 out of 7 or 8 weeks, something like that.
Good.
But yeah, man, it's an exciting time of the year. Football's back. It's Saturday. I'll sit on the couch. I'll watch some college football. Starts off with college game day. I know up in the Northeast, college football is not your thing. I get it. Here in the South, it's like a religion.
Yeah, I know. I've heard, and I wish I kind of was a little bit more intelligent and experienced when it comes to college football, because that's literally the one thing I don't know. I know tennis so well. I went to the U.S. Open the other night. It was amazing.
I saw that.
It was one of the best things ever. We had the entire trip was from Cadillac, so we were in the Cadillac suite the entire time. It was awesome.
Look at you over here. Look at you.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So I know that college football is fun. I just wish I was a little bit more experienced with it. So maybe in the future. But regardless, we got lots of sports coming up. I'm so happy to have football back. I'll be rooting for a couple people on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because I have a lot of shares in them. So hopefully it's Godwin season because I'm a big Godwin fan this year. But all in all, I'm excited to see my Chargers out there. I think it's going to be an interesting revamp for the entire team, and it's going to be a patient process, but I think we're in the right direction.
And the good news is if you have DirecTV All of this weekend's UFC is on ESPN Plus, so you don't have to worry about not being able to see the content. Of course, I think everyone knows what's going on there. But yeah, we got NFL football tomorrow, NFL football on Friday from Brazil, college football on Saturday. We got MMA. You know, you can literally, I mean, if you want to sit there and watch the UFC and Bellator's on a little bit later because it's over in San Diego. And then, of course, you got Sunday football, Monday football. So I love this time of year. I just absolutely love it, you know.
I love it too, especially with the U.S. Open. So it's like, I'm down. I got money on Frances Tiafoe to win this whole damn thing. So if Tiafoe wins the whole thing, your boy is going to crush. So
what'd you get him at?
I got him at, I think, almost plus 2,000. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So he's been killing it.
I will say this. If you're under scored, our guy Coach is killing it.
Oh, my God. Hey, shout out to Coach. Back-to-back Millie Maker winners. I mean, like, what did he say? Within 10 days or something like that? Like, good for you, Coach. Coach deserves it. He puts in a lot of work. We've been saying it. He's the best DFS player in the business. We've been saying that. We're lucky to have him a part of the Fight HQ community, and he's a big staple for our community. And we like seeing people we know or have interacted with succeed. Yeah. So good for you, Coach. Keep it up. Keep winning some more.
No doubt about it. Of course, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Fight HQ. Of course, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel, whether it's here on YouTube, on the audio platforms. Also, memberships to the YouTube channel are now available if you want to help show your support for what we do here at Fight HQ. Of course, we'll be back next week. We'll get you ready for UFC Noche /UFC 306.